Welcome, everyone. I'm Wayne Shaw. Thank you for joining us today for this special international webinar on the evolving NATO defense market to include opportunities, trends, and what we think lies ahead. We're very, very excited to host senior stakeholders from the aerospace and defense industry, bringing their unique perspectives to a topic that is gaining strategic importance in today's complex and global landscape. As NATO enters a new phase of operational and strategic transformation, and it really is a transformation that's going on amid, heightened geopolitical tensions, their shifting security priorities, and growing technological demands, the defense market surrounding the NATO alliance is expanding very rapidly, from procurement modernization and cross-border interoperability to innovation in unmanned systems, cyber defense, space capabilities. This ecosystem is becoming much more dynamic and more competitive than ever before. So over the next hour, we're going to explore the key drivers behind NATO's defense posture, examine where the emerging opportunities lie for governments and industry, and consider how defense suppliers, both the big ones and the small ones, can position themselves for long-term relevance and success. We invite you, as was mentioned, to engage, ask questions, and help shape the discussion. This can be a bigger discussion than just us three on the screen, as we look toward the future of transatlantic defense cooperation. So, with that said, let me start off with some Q&A or some questions for my panelists, my esteemed panelists. First, Avi Kalo, who is a reservist in the Israeli Defense Force, and we're blessed to also have him working for Frost & Sullivan. Avi, let me ask you first, how does Frost & Sullivan actually possess and estimate the NATO defense market size? People might be interested in the veracity of our data before we start showing that data. How do we come up with some of these numbers? And I'll let you take it away with that first question.
Yeah, Wayne, thanks for the question, and thanks for the audience for the opportunity here to I would say present some of our Frost & Sullivan insights on this emerging and extremely vibrant market as we reflect during the I would say next hour or so. So following your question, Wayne, I would say that according at least to NATO data, rough data, and the Alliance defense spending graphs, we can say that they were growing by more than 50% just in last year, comparing to previous year, to 2023, where the rates were even higher, almost exceeding 20% of growth following the Russian invasion into Ukraine, obviously, increasing the alliance broad defense budget on national and multinational aspects as well. And it was roughly estimated, as we said, around 20%, and still, even if it's a bit more flattered this year, we still expect it to continue and grow. And now, when we just share the screen here with us. When we talk about the general overview about the market, we have two slides that discussing the growth phenomena. We would say, generally speaking, that 31 out of the 32 NATO member states are expected to meet the 2% GDP defense spending goal this year, with the only exception of Iceland, who does not carry a real military forces this times. This marks another steps of the alliance progress towards the ambitious goal of NATO to adopt the alliance summit conclusion taking place last year in the Netherlands, where we saw actually that members of the alliance are looking for 5% GDP percentage of I would say growth to be a part of the defense spending generally rate, which is this 5% following the President Trump's demands from the NATO alliance, as the US is trying to decrease its involvement in NATO investment, generally speaking, divided it into 3.5% of weapon system procurement and personnel, and the latter 1.5% to be a military-related infrastructure, cybersecurity, and logistics efforts, particularly outside of the classic, I would say, military-oriented expenses. Now, with regard to the countries, the members itself of the alliance, we could say that UK, Germany, and France obviously remain the top three absolute spending. The UK shows both a high and absolute budget and a strong CAGR of almost 7% for the next few years up to come, with over $1 billion expectations in 2027 of the defense budget. When it comes to Germany, for example, at least here, this slide concludes the enhancement initiative that was set by the chancellor itself in Germany, excluding the $100 billion that was set in 2023. So those amounts here are even on top of the initiative enhancement first excluded in 2023 and 2024. So those numbers are really outstanding in the history of Germany, definitely ever since, obviously, the end of World War II. So we're talking here on historic figures and historic trends that are changing the market landscape. You can see in the upper hand of the slide the CAGR rates for each and every country. And here, more specifically in the next slide, excuse me just a minute here. Here on the next slide, you can see more specifically the CAGR rates, the growth rates, annual growth rates of some of dominant NATO countries. As you can see, the eastern flank of the alliance, particularly countries like Poland, and I would say even countries like Denmark, even a bit more obviously Western to it, but yet we can see and Finland, of course, and others, we can see the impact of the Russian invasion and the Russian aggression impact directly into country-specific, I would say, defense budget spending. I would say, generally speaking, that obviously aside of Poland, who enjoys the fastest and highest and most aggressive growth within NATO members this year, I would say that our analysis at Frost & Sullivan reveals how countries that traditionally refrained from investing in defense now shifting course. The most indicative cases of the European mindset transformation era, as we speak about defense spending, are countries like Spain, Czech Republic, Belgium, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Hungary, all of which spent less than 1% of their GDP a decade ago on defense proposals. Today, they have surpassed the 2% GDP mark, and also some of them are pushing even to 4% mark of the GDP in defense spending. The top spender within NATO, as we said, is Poland, currently investing in defense over 4.5% of its GDP, reflecting a dramatic military bolster in the European eastern flank, as we said earlier. Also, following the question, when I would say that NATO ability to mobilize the defense industrial base, as we call it, the DIB, and leverage private investment is seen as vital as meeting the new targets that we're talking. And we'll discuss it in the next hour as well. We see that the business model and how you do deals and business in Europe, as we reflect it also in our engagement with our European clients, we can see that the total business environment within the alliance is totally changing. The volatility has accelerated defense spending across the alliance, pushing even historical numbers, as we said earlier. It also reflects a reinforced NATO eastern flank posture, prioritizing rapid mobility, air defense, and long-range fires, and catalyzes joint procurement, stockpiles, replenishment, and other aspects of defense industry, local spending. We will discuss it obviously later on, and how the local industries are also involving. The bottom line is, Wayne, that NATO growing defense budget reflects a deeper strategic transformation from legacy-heavy, old-fashioned Cold War posture to more agile, tech-forward, and collaborative force structured that creates substantial business and innovative opportunities for both established primes and agile startups as well. So I think that will conclude, at least for your first question, Wayne.
Yeah, so just to kind of pile on a little bit, I would say that, my anecdotal evidence, just based on who I have calls with, either proposal type calls or actual project work. I've had calls with just about every country on your list. And I'm actually involved in a project right now for a company in France. And I've had calls with almost every single country on that list, to include not just the usual suspects, but I had a call not too long ago with Romania, believe it or not. And I've had calls with a place in Finland. And I've had calls with places in the Czech Republic. So, Mir, did you have anything you wanted to kind of highlight, or it was,
I think that
the data that Avi just went over? Any thoughts on that?
I think that generally, just to add over to what Avi just shared with all of us about the figures, is that definitely we can see the growth depend on the events or the definitely very close by to the conflict area or the neighbor countries to the conflict area that we have seen. Poland, of course, is the leading one, but I think that we see a lot of both concern, but definitely active actions taken by different member countries in order to ensure that they will have the right capabilities, the technologies, and NATO is definitely taking an active part in that, and we'll discuss that later on in the session, how they are doing that in terms of the, as an example, preparing themselves for a drone threat.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mir. So, Avi, you did a great job of showing those slides showing, total dollars for the leading NATO countries, and then who's got the fastest growth rate with the CAGR numbers. So, following that NATO market growth, which obviously are very historic in terms of the numbers there, what do you see as the leading military domains that the alliance member countries are focused on to try and kind of peel back one layer of the onion? Is it the air domain, the cyber domain, space, land? I mean, the war in Ukraine has got a little bit of all that. Any thoughts on that, Avi?
Yeah, well, that's another great question, Wayne, and obviously probably the most substantial one when dealing the changing nature of defense posture within NATO markets. I would say that we at Frost & Sullivan obviously follow, assess, and monitor the different segments, almost endless segments, military all across domains in the NATO markets those days, obviously, and the last years, particularly ever since the Russia-Ukrainian war is embarked. So it became the dramatic market also for us to research and focus on. I would just to make it more simple for our audience, I would focus it on 5 top dominant current military domains. The latter one I will give Meir as an expert for the counter drones to address. But I would start with the more classical domains that are emerging, and I guess that our I would say audience probably is aware of some of those trends as well. I would start with the drone, the UAVs, the unmanned aerial vehicles. I would say that the nature of warfare has significantly evolved with the introductions of UAVs into modern military operations. As the Russia-Ukrainian war shows, drone warfare is now actually the new reality. It's not an upcoming reality, but it's a stabilized reality as well. Reshaping both aerial combat and strategic military concepts of operations and into the industry itself. The lower, the better, I would say, when it comes to drones. When it comes to UAVs categories, meaning that the lower categories, which also Meir and his team are addressing, are the probably the most proliferized one. Category 1 of the tactical mini UAVs and micro UAVs, up to tactical UAVs in category 3 of the UAV standardization of NATO, as we know, becomes the most proliferative segment within hundreds of models and platforms for suggested ones, vendors, and different contracts, actually, all across the continent and all across the alliance of NATO. We at Frost & Sullivan assess a total UAV NATO market stands for over $16 billion this year and expected to grow in steady yet intensive rate of over 8% per year, concluding it to a total of over $25 billion in more than a conservative focus if we conclude it up to 2030, I would say. If geopolitical tensions to arise in front of Russia and other members, numbers obviously will get higher and demands will grow. In this framework, we at Frost & Sullivan assess that the UAV category 1 to 3 platforms, as we said, is a leading per market share and growth, whereas classical and massive domains such as category 5 HAIL UAVs are going to lose some ground in the market comparing to tactical drones, who's becoming more and more multitask oriented and more, I would say, agile when it comes to performance on battlefield itself. While fixed wings UAV remain dominant due to range and endurance, hybrid and VTOL, the vertical takeoff and landing designs are gaining tractions as well, especially in the complex terrain of semi-urban environment, such as the eastern flank, for example, when engaging Russia. Finally, loitering munitions, we could assess them as part of this phenomena, even though drones are a different one. But yet, if we're trying to assess loitering munitions, are becoming, those kamikaze drones are becoming increasingly popular in NATO for several key strategic, operational, and technological reasons. primarily as it enables mass deployment, including in swarms, to overwhelm enemy defense. Obviously, this is one of the main trends that Frost Sullivan is focused on discussing our clients within the NATO alliance. The second one that I've written to myself out of 5 is the missile defense, which is obviously one of the most strategic pivot currently in the NATO posture, defense posture, not only nationally, but particularly multinationally and in front of the US, obviously. All across the missile defense architecture, from low altitude threats to strategic BMD threats, the industry also pursuing to innovative paths for advanced directed energy technologies like laser and others, and high power microwaves. At lower altitude, we've seen against strategic threat. We've seen some more mass solutions that are coming tactical into the markets. Some of them are with mayors and other colleagues' support from the Israeli local industry, for example, that support the counter drones industry, generally speaking, and bringing solutions to the European soil as well. On strategic level, we see mainly primes that are taking the lead from the US, Israel, and some of European allies such as France and the UK that takes the solutions, but obviously those narrow solutions are more strategic G2G solutions like the Arrow 3, David Sling, and the THAAD, obviously missile ballistic counter system. EU players such as MBDA are emerging as well, but still not as dominant, as prestigious as the primes that I mentioned earlier. Anyways, in Frost & Sullivan, we foresee the expected growth of the MD market of over 8% per year for the next 5 years, reflecting the crucial importance of missile defense architecture to counter superpower adversarial threats, primarily obviously Russia, but also China and other players, even Iran, I would say. This even becomes more dramatic when taking into account the fact that MD contracts are long period transactions and quite conservative market, as we've seen getting high altitude as well on this regard, particularly on high altitude solutions. On lower altitude, we will discuss later. Also, May will elaborate, as I mentioned, about counter drones, so it will fill the blanks for this category. The third category would be tanks, the MBTs, main battle tanks. I will just mention shortly that NATO European members are anticipating to lead the global market by passing, by the way, the US and Middle Eastern players as well, driven by major procurement and modernization initiative prompted by regional security concerns, particularly the concerns obviously from Russian invasion to other members in the alliance. The NATO tank landscape, ground tank is shaped by deepening collaborations among EU members, centered on developing the next generation tanks. Some of it that we know are tanks like Leopard and others, and Leclerc and the Abrams, the US-American Abrams tanks as well. We can say that what is the most interesting point about the tanks market within NATO, that it's not combined only by platform, classical legend platforms, but also by their ingredients, I would say, or the subsystems that are attached to it, such as the active protection systems and other battle management systems and so on, that gives the added value for the end users and usually reflect also how end users are choosing the vendors to those dynamic projects. The last one that I will address, Wayne, is the airborne ammunition market, where we see that NATO demands for advanced airborne ammunition is rising across all missile categories. This growth stems from integration of cutting-edge technologies that enhance platform lethality and operational effectiveness. As a result, the market expansion increasingly depends on vendors' ability to embed such technologies, placing greater strain on supply chains. Yet, as technology plays a critical role in accelerating weapon systems, the NATO airborne ammunition industry is experiencing a dramatic boost driven by rising R&D investments in emerging advancements, such as precision-guided munitions, extended long-range missiles, and hypersonic technologies as well. Yet, this market is placed with a more common legacy vendors, primarily in the leading players in the US, Israel, and European leading classical OEMs. The last domain that I would suggest discuss is Meir to elaborate about the counter drones. Meir, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'll take definitely the discussion where you just ended up your sharing of the information and the trends, and to elaborate a bit about the drone threat. And definitely, I think that NATO is all the time looking about the ongoing operational activities taking place in the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, and at the same time looking over what's happening in the Middle East and other places. And I think that one of the things that they definitely see is the how much devastating commercial drones or Type 1, Type 2 drones, no matter if it's using the different types of DJI hotels or even using an FPV drones, are changing the entire combat landscape. And that's something that definitely affect the way that NATO is preparing for that kind of a challenge. And I'll try a little bit to explain how NATO is now looking on that area and how they're preparing themselves. And we can definitely take for an example the fact that drones can be produced in mass production. The fact that they have very accurate capabilities of navigation, the fact that they can use as a weaponized or for even intelligence collection, they're changing definitely the way that we have seen the war zones till the recent war in Ukraine, and by the way, as well in Israel and other places. So the fact that that technology is evolving very fast requires NATO to be prepared. And when I'm saying that NATO need to be prepared, they need to all the time evaluate new defense technologies that can be used by NATO members. And it's very important to mention the fact that when we're looking on the defense side and air defense, also by the way for the drones, is we are looking for the detectors and the effectors. And I must say that NATO is evaluating all the time technologies by different exercise that they're doing, like the Thai exercise. They're holding several sessions along the year with different members to come and test the capabilities on different scenarios. Ourselves, we participate in several exercises like that. And I must say that NATO is evaluating all the time different types of technologies to be prepared the most for what they look as their main priority of protection. And that's something that I want to a bit to touch, because nowadays when we understand that we have a threat, we need to understand, prioritize what we want to protect. And part of what NATO is now evaluating of the protection area is both of what we are calling their own sensitive sites and critical assets of NATO in order to ensure that they are protected from any intelligence collection or any damage that can be taken once a conflict is coming. And at the same time, to find the right solution to protect what you're calling the forces, the maneuvering forces, the battalion forces, the brigade that will move on the field. And all of that requires different types of plans and capabilities in order to ensure that they will have that ready when the time will come. Now, I must say that the role and the part of the industries is critical in that area. And the reason for that is that technologies are coming at the end from the industry in different levels. It can be for small, unique industries, by the way, like ourselves and others, and come up to the integrators, the leading one. It can be from many different, as you know, leading in Europe, like it can be Leonardo, Hensoldt, and many others that are taking part in those kind of projects in order to implement different technologies. And one of the lessons learned as well is that there is no silver bullet to stop over the different threats that Avi just explained before that might threat the front line or the back army bases of NATO. And as of that, they are looking all the time for multi and different layer of solution in order to protect the different environments. Now, as of NATO, and that's something that we are all the time required to do, they have their demand, which is absolutely understood to have the connectivity over to NATO command and control, and to the recipient as part of the interoperability of all the different technologies in order to ensure one, let's say, common ability of sensors that will be able to detect and at the same time to create one field of understanding of what's happening out there, understanding the enemy, understanding the capabilities, and to ensure the forces a maneuver and protection. All of that requires us as an industry to develop, as you can see over here, and to be very dynamic and agile based on the NATO requirements. And as of that, we are all the time, and NATO are sharing that in all the different events that they're having, what are their next and how they see the next challenge and what is their expectations. And the evolving of the technologies and the threat in one hand requires all the time the evolving of the defense side or the technology provided over to NATO to fit itself to the different threats out there. Now, one of the interesting things is that we see that we all know about traditional solution used in the battlefield, both for the what we're calling the command and control, both for the communication. On the other hand, we know about traditions of using technologies of detection and both of the defeat. But I want to give a very good example of what we had experience with NATO is that they were very much open to implement new solution and new technologies as part of their, let's say, different capabilities out there that they want to implement. And for an example, implementing what we are calling, for an example, cyber over RF capability that will allow them to be very precise in what they are locating and very precise in the protection, and to ensure that you can make a protection not only in times of war, but also in the time like right now, in the time that we need to protect and ensure that no surveillance drones are coming nearby to our assets. So implementing those different new technologies, changing the methodology of NATO all the time, and they're updating that, they're sharing it, and it's something that we as an industry need to be aware of all the different requirements. Now, of course, the different state members have different needs, as mentioned before. If it's on the frontiers lines, Poland is definitely one of the places, and we can go into some of the Scandinavians. Definitely there are increasing requirement for implementing those part of technologies for the protection. So I'm sure and I'm confident that there are several things that we need to keep in mind. One is that we need to ensure that there will be simple solution that will be implemented. And for that, I will all the time compare for the different projects that are taking place. For example, the Eastern Wall is one of the projects that is as so-called the billion project to protect the eastern border. But I think that to be practical, NATO is looking for what we are calling a very highly and very fast adaptive of technologies that can be used by the forces tomorrow morning. As long as you are keeping the standard and you are able to use it, to train it, and to be used in the different countries, that is definitely a demand from NATO. The other fact is to ensure the simplicity of the usage. That's something that is very important from NATO side. No need to go for something that will be too much complicated. No need to go for something that will need too much expertise. Using simple solution that will provide the required defense for the forces. So that's something that I will all the time mention, and building the right command and control, the C4I, that it will allow the NATO forces to be able to both make the right decision is critical for NATO as an overall concept. So definitely, at least from what I've seen, participate in NATO, both on the events and both of the exercise, and getting that feedback as well from the member countries, I think definitely it's something that the NATO is going for. Being up to date to the next threat is crucial. And if, for an example, and we have seen that, I've just mentioned that in a very short, the Spider operation in Ukraine, that Ukraine has launched in Russia, and they're using drones over for that attack, using a very precise drone attack. We need to remember that NATO is looking all the time how much they can adapt technologies that will fit itself very fast, very accurate to the next threat. And that's something that industries and technologies need to have in mind and need to provide it. So definitely, I think that can give a good example of the drones and counter drone and how the European part and different players from the industry. And by the way, industry, research companies, definitely Frost and Sullivan of what you're doing as understanding where are the trends and doing the analysis of the market is very crucial to build up the next solution for the forces. So that's my part.
Okay, thank you, Mir. Yeah, last month I was in Portugal for about a week, and I got introduced to a drone company called Tekever, Tekever, all one word. And really amazing if you go to their website and see all the innovation that they're doing. That's what you were really getting at, is innovation, which requires R&D funding. So Avi, let me ask you, as the R&D budgets are increasing for emerging technologies, and that becomes kind of the main venue for innovation all across the NATO alliance, what's the leading route for innovation, you think, in this very dynamic market? I mean, how are NATO members balancing the needs to innovate, which requires R&D funding, but at the same time, they also need to have some procurement, like the Germans are, Germany is procuring, I think, 1,000 Leopard 2 A8 main battle tanks. How do you see that balance working out?
Well, it's two massive questions, and we'll try to summarize it in a few minutes and try to conclude some insights on it from our from our backlog. And I would say that obviously when you're pointing exactly what's going on currently in the most hottest areas or topics that are changing in the environment, in the business environment in NATO, and there is a tension, as you mentioned, between national and multinational projects, between R&D efforts to modernization and procurement efforts, and each and every vendor in the industry, and Meir is obviously one of them, or representing a company is one of them, is also facing this tension. I would say that particularly speaking about the roads to market or to innovation in NATO. We can say that strategically things are dramatically changing currently in NATO alliance from Brussels and beyond all across the continent. And obviously it also impacting some of the US market as well. NATO has just adopted recently at late 2024 the Industrial Capability Expansion Pledge, urging allies to expand their defense industrial base via joint procurement, cooperations, and leveraging alliance regulations and standards. But also on the legal side of the house, we do see some dramatic changes as well. This framework helps nations to commit to joint R&D, both but also ensuring domestic industries receive rules like NF and resources like jobs, more funding, IPs, subcontracting, and so on within the multinational, I would say, acquisition or platforms that are emerging. The foremost platforms that are dealing with innovation directly in NATO, at least officially, is DIANA, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic Alliance, is the NATO's actually flagship accelerator dedicated to a dual-use civil and military technologies focused on emerging startups and SMEs through challenge-based competitions, and obviously rough application platforms that you need to cross before getting into Diana's project, which is highly prestigious, obviously. Successful applicants receive mentorship, funding, and access to unique test centers within NATO official frameworks. with technology maturation tracked from proof to concept to operational demonstration. Diana selects startups from NATO Innovation Challenge through, I would say, competitive stage process that emphasize dual use potential, technology novelty, and strategic alignment. For example, last year, from over 1,300 startups that Accelerator is focused, only 40 projects have been chosen, getting them into a bootcamp and protocol funding, exposing young innovators into, I would say, prime OEMs within NATO alliance and obviously end users, including armed forces themselves. Another aspect or another funding is is the NATO Innovation Fund, the NIF, with over 1 billion euro. Only annual investment is the world's first multi-sovereign venture fund, a governmental one targeting deep tech and dual use solution in order to mitigate, obviously, technologies, particularly commercial technologies that are needed in defense world, and there are no other easy solutions for OEMs or governments to capture them. Hence, those routes are bringing solutions into the markets and into end users more smoothly than other solutions. And aside of that, and I just mentioned two of the routes of NATO. Obviously, we have a full a brief on those routes as well. But I would say that there are, as people know, there are national initiatives all across the continent. Primarily Germany to take the lead for innovation routes among NATO members. Its flagship program is the Defense Equity Facility, DEF, which is a launch with a 175 million euro venture to co-invest facility targeted at dual use and defense technology startups, aiming to catalyze more than 5 million euros in sector investment by 2027, which is obviously accelerating dramatically based on the initiative enhancement of Germany that we talked about earlier. Again, Germany is open more now to innovation, and that's a dramatic and fascinating market that is currently changing. Last but not least, that I will talk about the routes to market is the standardization agreements that happens in NATO. It's changing dramatically, probably in the most rapid pace ever we've seen in NATO before. It talking about the standardization of joint R&D programs and contracts, such as the NATO Defense Innovative Accelerator that we talked about, Diana, encouraging technological and operational standardization, minimizing duplication while supporting joint technological outbreaking, innovative advancement in a way that is, even though it sounds a bit contradictory, it is in a way the regulation, at least in order to address some of the contracts and some of the efforts and the procurement programs that NATO currently efforts on the multinational scale and also on national scale as well. When discussing mail, when the balancing between the security imperatives with collective NATO commitments, that's, as we said earlier, is a constant tension, and leading members to employ a blend of strategies, trade-offs, and institutional frameworks to meet innovative KPIs. We here decided to try and I would say give a screenshot of some of the forefront strategies of the current forefront strategies of NATO in order to set some understandings to the audience about what's going on. Obviously, it's just a pinpoint shot of it, and it's not obviously a full understanding or I would say a presentation of what's going on in the market, but I think it gives a good hint of where we are headed to. So I think, for example, when we're discussing those aspects in the multinational projects, that would be probably the prime and first and foremost change within NATO following the Russian invasion is the acceleration in multinational collaborative programs that we do see currently happens within all across the continent. This brings into effect some notable changes that becoming, even in those multinational collaborative programs, more agile and more ready to collaborative in scalable business scale, and obviously procurement programs as well. More specifically about these initiatives, such as the programs that I mentioned here, like the FCAS, which talk about the next fighter jet, or the NGCRC, which talk about the next battle tank in NATO, and so on. You can find it, or later on, the main ground combat and the future combat air system, and so on. They are all initiatives that reflect a joint investment by NATO members, particularly those in the lead, like France, the UK, and Germany, but second-tier nations as well, such as Spain Finland and other countries that are competing and trying to impact and set their insights into those programs as well. Obviously, some of those programs are not dealing only with the platform, but also with the most integrated technologies and advanced high-end technologies that we do see on the market, such as unmanned teaming, AI, next generation sensors, ISR efforts, and so on. Obviously, those projects usually are led by the prime OEMs in those countries that we mentioned earlier, with less business models flexibility as long-term planned military build-up programs, but yet there are some initiatives that can work also here for innovative path as well. Needs to be checked out specifically for each and every program. The second point that we talked about is and we talk about innovation in NATO, is the innovative hubs, the innovation hubs and accelerators. We talked earlier about Diana, but obviously there are others as well. As we talked about Diana, so we mentioned that aside of talking about those projects, the dual use projects, we are focused there on prime technologies such as AI, autonomy, cyber, quantum computing, and deep space. They are just a part of the technologies that are set forth through those programs. When talking about NIF, for example, the Innovative Fund, it particularly focuses on connecting between startups and primes and OEMs or end users. So it's quite a unique program that supports more youngest technologies in this vibrant market, such as, for example, the counter drones industry. That could be a good example for that. When we talk about, and obviously when we talk about accelerators, we don't cover here, but we have obviously Wayne insights on it deeply, and we publish some reports, and our research efforts also focus on the accelerators, the private commercial accelerators that are not governmental, that you can see all across, flourishing currently, starting to flourish all across the continent. It started first in the US, in the Silicon Valley. It started in Israeli defense tech scene as well, all those accelerators that are emerging. But recently, we've seen some trends of becoming more and more relevant also for the European continent as well. So we have a different discussion on it, on how private accelerators can impact the defense tech and defense generally as a whole industry. And we can elaborate it obviously in different sessions. When it comes to localization, that's probably the most dominant trend within the NATO alliance, particularly among European members of the alliance. We do see that obviously localization enhances the strategic autonomy and reduces reliance on non-NATO suppliers, particularly in Eastern Europe and frontline states. The four models that I mentioned here, the IP transfer, the defense industrial base, the LEAP, and the offsets, reflect NATO's shift toward an agile, collaborative, and tech-driven defense procurement, enabling faster fielding of capabilities while aligning with both national interests and alliance-wide goals. To meet political and industrial goals, NATO partners are increasingly requiring local production, IP transfer, and offsets, where the suppliers agrees to reinvest part of the content value back to buyer's economy and the country itself. This supports the National Defense Industrial Base, the DIB, as we mentioned earlier, that concludes currently new business venues to local markets, where as long-term local industrial partnerships, which is the LEAP, refers to contractual obligations within defense procurement deals, where a portion of the manufacturing, development, maintenance, or technology work is carried out locally in the purchasing country. A common current example of the LEAP contracts is the establishing of local MRO, maintenance, repair, and overall facilities as part of a large-scale defense deals, but doesn't necessarily mean only large-scale deals, but also you could find it in medium and small deals as well, that are becoming more and more offset towards those localization trends. The fourth point deals with private-public sectors partnerships. Some of it, in a way, meets the accelerators that we discussed earlier. But here we're talking about governments that are working with private defense firms to co-develop and co-finance critical infrastructure, R&D, and training system for defense military solutions. These PPP models help balance rising procurement needs with fiscal constraints. They are increasingly used for cyber defense, ISR infrastructure and sensors, training and simulation, and logistic platforms, which means less for the classical legendary platforms such as tanks or fighter jets or drones, but more for, I would say, following solutions or outstanding solutions that obviously integrated into those legendary platforms. The last but not least, but probably the most interesting one, is the capability as a service that is actually emerging currently as a result of, I would say, budget constraints and other political aspects that sometimes has some limitations for delivering full platforms. So we do see it enters into the defense industry world. This model allows NATO members, which is actually a new one, to lease or subscribe to capabilities, including platforms such as ISR drones, electronic warfare systems, satellite services, space services, and so on, without full ownership. It supports faster capability deployment, flexibility, and reduce upfront investments, particularly useful for smaller NATO countries. Companies provide platforms, operations, and maintenance under performance-based contracts are relatively relevant for those efforts. So in that conclude, when at least my answer to this question about where NATO is headed with regard to innovation and R&D, and obviously just a hint for future to come in this regard. Going back to you.
Okay, thank you, Avi. So, Mir, if I could build on what Avi just relayed, you had said in one of your slides that protecting critical infrastructure and from UAVs, that's going to be pretty important, right? And as Ukraine has shown us in some of their drone attacks on Russia, you don't have to be right next to the front line to have to worry about a drone attack, right? So really all NATO nations, not just the ones that have a common border with Russia, probably need to be somewhat concerned with protecting all the critical infrastructure. And all these things that Avi just mentioned, right? That's going to require factories, innovation centers, research labs, what have you, that they're going to become critical infrastructure, right? Like to go back to that recent trip I made to Portugal and that company I discovered called TechEver, they're building drones much bigger than this kind of drone in my hand, that are being used by the Ukrainians in the war with Russia, right? So even though Portugal, little old Portugal, is about as far away from Russia as you can almost get, they may need to worry about it too, because of who they're providing their drones to. So any thoughts on like what you see as all this innovative infrastructure gets built out, how much that's going to increase the business for counter UAS systems to protect them as part of critical infrastructure? Any thoughts?
So maybe I'll start and say first of all that in today technology that evolves all the time, and it's reminding me when I was in the Israeli Cyber Authority or in the when cyber is become a real concern, by the way, to NATO and other countries. You very fast understand that a country can start a conflict even without moving one soldier. So you can do a lot of damage even by just starting a cyber attack. And it's very much similar to the usage of the drone in the battlefield, or the use of the drone in the what we are calling homeland security, or on our backyard. At the same time, when you're using the drones, you don't need to move even a soldier to the land or to the territory next to you. You just can unleash an attack from a very far distance, and if you go for type 2, type 3 drones, they can cover lots of distance in a very short time. You can see that one. It's very fast, very accurate, and the damage that it can make, again, for critical infrastructures, port, refineries, chain of supplies, airports, it's huge. So we definitely need to think on that future type of battlefield as not a science fiction. It's something that happens today, and it's something that already we need to be prepared for. And you're right. I mean, counter drone is definitely an area, in my opinion, that will increase in the next years, and definitely will require a lot of attention from the industries and definitely from the forces to ensure the protection of themselves and to ensure the protections of their assets and to ensure another point that the country continue on to operate its essential and vital resources for the civilians. So all of that is definitely something that we need to take in consideration, the same as we had during what we are calling the cyber warfare, because it can do a damage very much equivalent to that. So all of those places that we define as the chain of supply, the sensitive sites, those places that are the manufacturing sites, are definitely the places that we need to protect. Now, you mentioned definitely how countries should be prepared for that, and NATO is playing a major role, by the way, in changing that kind of a concept. And I'll explain how. Because in majority of the countries in Europe, the regulation hasn't been changed in terms of how you are, and someone just wrote down about the regulation. The regulation is not allowing you to implement the different solutions, and you need to be depend on the army, or you need to be depend on the police, and NATO, as a major player in Europe, definitely can prepare and share its concept, and definitely it's having its own impact on the different decision makers in order to change that. And definitely to ensure that implementing the right technologies on the right places, we won't be able to implement, let's say, battlefield solutions in the in airports. We won't be able to implement spoofing or jamming or other kinetic solutions. But there are other technologies that definitely fit as a passive to those places. So for the question that I see that raised over here, if the regulators are supporting electronic warfare, the answer is no. They are not supporting electronic warfare in those places. They are supporting detection in some of the places, and we see a change starting now. We mentioned before, you mentioned Romania, and we mentioned, for an example, Poland, and we mentioned Germany is now making a change in the regulation in order to build up the capacity or the capabilities to make that kind of a protection. So I think that there is a change. I think that NATO by itself play a critical role in those places to ensure or to ensure that we are covering and we are protecting our essential sites in order to ensure the operation as well as NATO in that kind of a warfare. So I hope that I answered that question.
Okay, thank you, Mir. Yeah, thank you, David Regner, for that question. That's great. There was a really great issue of the Journal of Electromagnetic Dominance that I get because I'm a life member of the Association of Old Crows. Came out earlier this year. I can't remember what month, but it had the cover story was counter UAS in Europe, and it was a very lengthy article and had a lot of great information in it. David, I will try to make sure I send you like a PDF of that issue after the webinar. It had a lot of great information in it, in addition to what Mir just said. And yeah, the regulations definitely need to change to make sure that, you know, the different counter UAS disruptors, you know, electronic warfare being one of the ways to affect a UAS is allowed. And there would probably be some power power limitations, and probably, you know, is it omnidirectional antenna, is it a directional antenna, because otherwise the spectrum could very quickly become a mess in Europe, right? If there were no power limits and, you know, everybody could just use omnidirectional antennas, I mean, there would just be, it would be a mess in the electromagnetic spectrum, right? But yet we don't want to have like a key refinery taken out by one little drone with some C4 explosive attached to it, because we weren't allowed to use electronic warfare to try and bring it down before it got to the refinery or something like that, right? And I know there's a variety of techniques that are out there, or methodologies, and I guess you could call them weapon systems, to bring down drones. Everything from these cargo nets that get shot out of like a rifle to electronic warfare to just literally shooting at them with a gun to more advanced cyber techniques. And since you've given me an opening here, I will mention that I think the electromagnetic spectrum doesn't probably get nearly enough emphasis when we're talking about drone warfare, either on the offensive side or on the defensive side, the counter UAS, because most of these drones, they're not fully autonomous. And please correct me, either of my esteemed panelists, if I'm wrong here, but most drones out there depend on a link from the controller to the actual vehicle that goes through the electromagnetic spectrum. And if you break that link, if you jam it, if you the receiver on board the drone can no longer receive that link from its controller, a variety of things can happen, right? It either just goes stupid, or it goes into an orbit, or it goes into a return to home. Over my Air Force career, I saw a lot of these incidents with bigger drones too. And that's all I'll say about that. But some of the things that happen, it's just like, oh my God, we didn't think of that before. So any thoughts on the importance of the electromagnetic spectrum, both for using drones offensively, but probably for this discussion more so counter UAS?
I'll just mention one point that I'm receiving it many times. I'm getting the question if RF is still ruling or is still required in order to fly and to maneuver the drones and to control the drones, and how much RF will play a role. So definitely it is. I mean, in order to get the precision, in order to get the right band, in order to get the right control, RF is there. Of course, and Wayne, you're absolutely right. In all the different solutions that are out there to implement and to use, there are different technologies, there are different techniques. At the end, it depends what you want to protect. It depends how much you want to invest, and it depends a lot of the type of the solution that you need to have into your asset. So definitely there are solutions out there. So I think that I answered that question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Avi, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think as many here headed out, I think the counter drones industry is changing dramatically in NATO, and I can say from our perspective, as we discussed, when, as you know, and engaging some of the primes and OEMs and other companies that are dealing with this vibrant market, we do see that currently NATO, I would say cautiously but bluntly, that NATO does not standing in the pace of how the market is changing. Meaning that following what Mary said about the electronic warfare regulations, that will reflect also the business itself. NATO, for example, and NATO members, and we can see just recently with the incidents that happened in Belgium and in Denmark and probably in the UK, in other countries, probably more to come, as the Russians are probably testing and seeing how the deterrence of NATO actually working. We can see the deterrence doesn't work when it comes to counter drones. There are good solutions in the market that are coming from different countries. Most of it, by the way, are non-NATO members. And NATO is still finding it challenging to handle those and challenge those, I would say, new threats that are emerging. And it's another reflections of I would say, the long way that NATO headquarters still needs to take over in order to mitigate emerging threats, military threats, not only with counter drones, but in a variety of all across domains threats. And that would be a good example for it as well.